The time for silence is over.
To the street that leads across the bridge, right on the corner.
Waiting on the other side were Alabama state troopers, under orders from Governor Wallace to stop the marchers.
Some of them had on coveralls and jeans, and they were giving us the finger and that type of thing. But for the most part, pretty quiet.
Okay.
And then we got to the top of the bridge. Down below, we saw this here blue
Park's posse was on the sideline.
blue uniform. And behind the state trooper was the sheriff posse on horseback. And we continued to walk. No one saying a word. And we came within hearing distance of the state trooper. And this major identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Trooper. This is an unlawful march. Will not be allowed to continue. I give you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." And Jose said, "Major, give us a moment to pray." And before we can halfway back for people to kneel and pray, he said, "Troopers, advance." And you saw these men putting on their gas masks. And they came toward us, beating up in nightsticks, bullwhips, trampled us with horses, and releasing their kick ass. I was getting hit by a state trooper with a nightstick.
In the film, it looked like when they hit you first, it was like dominoes.
Right. And people just start trampling over each other. The last thing I remember, I was just out on the ground, and I thought I was going to die. I thought I saw that. And I thought it was the Lions protest. And 40 years later, I don't recall I made it back across the bridge, back to the street, back to the church.
Ten days after Selma, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was introduced. It added additional protections, got rid of literacy tests, but it also had a way to prevent any other creative changes.
State governments had to submit their changes to the federal government for approval.
The Voting Rights Act identified parts of the country that had a history of voter discrimination, mostly in the South, and set up federal oversight. So if these places wanted to change anything about voting, like enacting a new law or closing polling locations, it first had to get the okay from the U.S. Justice Department or federal courts that it wasn't discriminatory. Immediately, non-white voter registration in these southern states grew, like in Mississippi, where it went from barely 7% to almost 60% in just 3 years. The Voting Rights Act did what earlier civil rights laws hadn't. When Joseph Johnson went to vote in his first presidential election, this isn't what he expected.
The line went this way in front of our auditorium and snaked around into our library.
The last person at his polling location didn't get to vote until 1 a.m.
It was the longest line that I've ever waited in my entire life. Some people, they were just like, well, screw it.
The challenge to the law brought the issue all the way to the Supreme Court.
1965 Voting Rights Act. Shelby
versus Holder.
Shelby versus Holder.
I just get wound up when you ask me about voting rights.
But in 2013, the Supreme Court, with a majority of Republican-appointed judges, took on a case about the Voting Rights Act.
This statute is in part about our march through history to keep promises that our Constitution says for too long were unmet.
The issue is why just in these states?
Justice Scalia, it's a fair question, and I was speaking to the aggregate.
Not just a fair one, it's the crucial question.
They decided that the way the law calculated which states would have that federal oversight was outdated, and therefore unconstitutional.
Some states passed voting legislation just hours after the ruling. Alabama implemented new voter ID laws. North Carolina eliminated 7 days of early voting. And the list goes on. The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, an independent federal agency, says these are the 5 most common voter suppression tactics. They happen across the country, but the only state that has ticked every box is Georgia.
The Secretary of State, I work to secure our elections and prevent illegal citizens or illegal immigrants from voting in Georgia.
One study showed that in communities where more than 90% of registered voters were minorities, the average minimum wait time at the polls was 51 minutes. When whites made up more than 90% of voters, it was just 6 minutes.
7 hours, 45 minutes, and 13 seconds it took for me to vote in Fulton County, Georgia. As soon as I saw the line, I had to stop watching my phone. I spent the first couple hours listening to a new Run the Jewels album, and then I ended up listening to the entire discography. And then I started watching season 8 of Curb Your Enthusiasm, and that's 5 hours. It is 1 o'clock in the morning, and somebody was like, "Hey, y'all remember we came to vote yesterday, right?"
Not everyone has to wait. This is a map of all the polling locations in Josephs County that had reports of long lines. And here's the percentage of non-white voters in each area. Notice how most places with lines were in less white areas? The poll closures and the other decisions that led to those lines disproportionately affected people of color. And whether or not that was intentional, those kinds of decisions in places like Texas used to be highly regulated and much less frequent.
The Secretary of State, I work to secure our elections and prevent illegal citizens or illegal immigrants from voting in Georgia.
In 2017, 560,000 voters were purged from Georgia's voter rolls. A report later found that black voters were purged at a higher rate in more than half of Georgia's counties. Here's one impact. The 2017 exact match law prevented 53,000 Georgians from having their registrations accepted. Nearly 70% were black.
Other states enacted voter ID laws too, along with other measures that had been previously stopped, like purging voter rolls and closing polling locations. 1,173 places in total, 750 just in Texas. So in 2019, the House of Representatives did just that, passing a new bill to update the criteria for which states get federal oversight. John Lewis, then a congressman in his 17th term, presided over the vote. But the bill passed almost entirely along party lines. Almost no Republicans voted for it, and nearly every Democrat did. Then the bill moved to the Republican-held Senate, where it isn't going to get a vote. And even if it does pass the Senate, the Trump White House has threatened to veto it, arguing the oversight is unnecessary. But the House, Senate, and White House are all up for grabs in the 2020 election. And this is one of the many areas the two presidential candidates have polar opposite views.
Pass the bill to restore the Voting Rights Act. It's one of the first things I'll do as president if elected.
Join me every Sunday afternoon. Hello and welcome everybody. This is The Left Speaks. Today is October the 18th and the election is quickly coming upon us. Early voting has already started in most states, including my home state of Nevada, my current home state, I should say. There's a lot at stake, obviously. Last episode, we covered Trump's problem with white supremacy and white nationalism and the KKK and the neo-Nazi party and the endorsements he's received from prominent individuals in those groups. And somebody brought up in the comments a lawsuit that had happened in the state of Nevada. And I said I would be happy to look into it because the comment that was dropped was basically saying that Democrats were against voting and trying to suppress the vote in the state of Nevada. Well, when I actually looked at it, it's what prompted this topic. It was actually a bunch of Democrat organizations that were suing the Republican Secretary of State for the state of Nevada, basically trying to say that you cannot enact voter suppression laws in the state of Nevada, even during the beginnings of COVID, because this was regarding the Democratic National Primary. Polling locations had been restricted to, or one of the proposed restrictions was to one site per county. And as we've seen from the most recent video, that's a very common way to suppress the vote, is you close polling locations. Now, a lot of individual Republicans do not have a race problem. Most individual Republicans and conservatives that I know, I don't consider racist. Most of them get along fine with individuals of different colors. But when somebody on the progressive left says that they have, Republicans and conservatives have a race issue, this is what we're referring to, among many other examples. This is the reason that the KKK and the neo-Nazi white nationalist parties of America think that the Republicans speak to them and why they get their votes. I don't know how to put this nicely. When the Georgia Secretary of State and now current governor comes out and says that he wants to purge voting records or voting registrations because of illegal immigration, it sounds ludicrous to me. But to give him the benefit of the doubt, let's go and see what he was talking about. Maybe Georgia has a history of illegal immigrants swaying elections that me, not being from the state of Georgia, am just completely unfamiliar with. I mean, let's see if we can take him on face value. So I started diving into that. This is what I found. In the entire state of Georgia, you have exactly 4% that is undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants. 4%. I would be willing to bet, here we go, 400,000 undocumented immigrants. That's only 36% of the overall immigrant population for the state of Georgia. And that represents 4% of the total state of Georgia. Now, mind you, this is the Census Bureau statistics that we're pulling. So we're not even limited to voters. You're not talking 4% of eligible voting population here. You were talking about 4% of the overall population. That includes children and people that aren't even of voting age. Okay? So, as we saw in the video, if I assume that the census is correct and we only have 400,000 undocumented immigrants, and then we've purged over 500,000 names, and 70% of them happen to be people of color, black people, and your state has a history of not liking black people voting, this is a problem. If Justice Scalia wants to know why these states in particular are still under scrutiny, this should easily answer that question. The minute the law was overturned, within hours, you had multiple states, and I'll let you take a wild guess which ones. I bet I can name some of them off the top of my head, even without having done research. Might get a couple wrong, but I'm going to limit my guesses to the Deep South. But the minute that they get to make their own laws without anybody from the federal government looking over their shoulder and saying, hey, you're not trying to keep black people from voting again, are you? These are the results that we see. And again, the majority of Republicans, conservatives that are friends of mine, do not have a race issue. The problem is the people that you are supporting obviously do, or having a race problem furthers their goals. When I was a conservative and said I was for smaller government, I did not mean less people voting that had a constitutional right to vote. That's not what smaller government is supposed to refer to. If you're a proud member of this country, as so many conservatives claim to be, then this is one of the most fundamental rights that we have. And to continuously knock people off of voting registers, and I don't care what the proposed excuse is, we see the results because they're black is a problem. And it shouldn't just be a progressive liberal problem. This is an American problem. And it should be an American problem, and we should all be on the same side of this. If you want to say the law should have been struck down because you agree with the Supreme Court decision that it was unconstitutional because it targeted certain segments of the country that happened to have an issue with race in the past when it was passed and continuously and obviously still do, you're welcome to do so. But please explain why, when the amendment to fix the supposed problem with the Voting Rights Act was passed through the House, Democrats were the only ones voting for it. If you want to say, hey, I agree with the intent of this law, but it wasn't written well enough, so I'm sorry, Mr. and Mrs. American citizen that happen to be black, you're not going to get to vote until we sort out the language. That's an opinion you can hold. I'll still mock you relentlessly for it, but that's at least an opinion that you can hold. But then when people are trying to pass laws that meet your standards, that have the language the way that you want it, and you just, no, that's not good enough either. No, that's not good enough either. You guys over there keep waiting to vote. We promise we'll get around to you eventually. It's unacceptable. And you wonder why Democrats say Republicans have a race issue. I'm not saying you, the individual Republican, the individual conservative, is a racist. I'm saying the Republicans that you are electing are enacting racist policies. I don't know how you get more basic definition of racist than, hey, if you're black, we're going to make it really hard for you to vote. We decided as a nation a long time ago that everybody in this country gets to vote and that you can't charge people to vote. I shouldn't have to have a Netflix subscription to survive the boredom of standing in an 8-hour-long line to exercise my constitutional right to vote. I shouldn't be able to finish entire seasons of shows and do some other stuff because the place I have to go vote happens to be in a majority black or brown, as we saw in Texas, neighborhood. Oh, well, that's not the intent. Well, it is the outcome. So let's fix the outcome. And then, again, when we're trying to fix the outcome, how come it's only Democrats that are trying to address this? This is a fundamental right in this country. This country that you claim to love. This freedom that you claim Democrats are out to ruin. Go look at some of these places. These are American citizens too. They're supposed to enjoy the same rights as you and me. This is one of the most basic freedoms in a democracy. And in a democracy, if you just start getting to decide who does and doesn't get to vote, at some point, you're not really a democracy anymore. Why is the left the only side that's trying to address this? Why is it all these Republican legislatures at the state level and Republican governors and Republican secretaries of state and a Republican president that are waving this voter fraud problem as if it's a problem and we need to lock down all these elections and make it extremely difficult to vote? Okay, well, maybe voter fraud's a real thing. Maybe these people that happen to be predominantly black, but maybe these people are just innocent bystanders that got caught in the crossfire of trying to solve an even bigger problem. Maybe voter fraud is that big. Again, maybe I don't know it all. So let's go look again. Here's a site from the BBC. The overall rate of voting fraud in the United States is between 0.00004% and 0.0009%. Forgive me if I added an extra zero on the 0.00004%, but there's a lot of zeros. This does not look like a problem, much less a problem that needs a solution to my uneducated eyes. And that is a study from 2017. If you want to take away, even quote unquote, accidentally, a lot of citizens' rights to vote, you need to have a damn good reason. Because I'm going to err on the side of every American of voting age gets to vote. I would think that would be a universal American thing. As I learned when I was looking up the reply to the court case that I was unfamiliar with last week, I am incorrect. That is not a universal American position. That is the position of one party right now. And again, I do not care what people say. I do not care if conservatives get on television and claim I'm in favor of every American having the right to vote. I'm looking at the policies. I'm looking at the results of those policies. And the results tell me exactly what the goal was. And if that wasn't the goal, then remove the policies. This isn't an accident. This isn't a bug in the code. This is the way that it was designed, and it is functioning as intended. And I'm not the one voting for people that put this in place. And I'm not the one that is closing my eyes. If you're like me, and you believe that every American has a fundamental right to vote and participate in our great democracy, then there is very little else that you could say that would convince me to vote in favor of the people trying to block other Americans from voting. You couldn't convince me with a tax cut. I'm not willing to sell my democracy so cheaply. This is a fundamental American right. If I came on television and told you, you know, for $200 this year, I'll give you $200, but you don't get to vote this year. I'll give you $300, but you don't get to vote this year. What's your price? There are people who have put their lives on the line. There are people who have fought and who have died throughout the history of this country to defend your right, your most basic right, to vote. And you're going to take that vote and use it to support politicians who are taking that right away from other Americans? What possible justification besides, I haven't thought about it, or I wasn't aware, can there be for that? I'm sorry if allowing black people to vote hurts your party. I'm sorry if allowing people of color to vote makes it more difficult for the issues and the politicians that care about those issues to get elected and passed for you. That's the way democracy is supposed to work. Everybody has a voice. Everybody gets to use that voice. And the voice with the majority at the end passes laws and enforces those laws. You have certain fundamental rights that cannot be infringed upon, but you don't get to take away other Americans' rights to pass laws that you like. This could very easily be turned to work against you. Today, it's on one party on the basis of race that is using legislative and legal tactics to make it extremely difficult for people to vote. It's one party, and they're enacting policies that affect people based on race. But it doesn't have to stay that way. Do you want both parties doing it? Because if it's effective, then both sides will eventually start playing by the same rules. If it's effective, then one side will continue to lose until somebody gets the idea to even the playing field. Let's pretend for a minute that it wasn't Republicans that were passing laws that made it more difficult for black people to vote and black people who lived in the cities to vote. Let's pretend that it was Democrats who were passing laws that were making it difficult for, I don't know, white people who live in the suburbs with working class jobs to vote. Let's pretend for a minute that you're a white truck driver who lives in the state of Louisiana like one of my friends. Can you afford to not drive your truck for 8 hours while you're standing in line till 1 a.m. the next day? You haven't missed 1 day of work at that point. You've potentially missed 2. Let's pretend instead of targeting people based off of race to make it difficult to vote, you know, there's a lot of fraud, a lot of election fraud, and the ones we've caught are predominantly Republicans. So we're going to make it really difficult for Republicans to vote. If you voted Republican last election, yeah, I'm sorry, we've got to really vet those ballots. We're going to knock off 570,000 names over a 0.00004% problem. Or let's make it not about political party. You know, we've seen a large problem. We've seen a large problem, you know, that 0.0009% problem of fraudulent ballots. And the people that we caught happened to be, I don't know, Catholic. So if you're Catholic or live in a parish or a county that happens to have a large Catholic population, you're going to have to stand in line for 8 hours. Not one election. All of them. Hell, not even an election. Primaries. Just to even decide, have an input on who's going to get to run. And that's assuming, after standing in line for those 8 hours, that your name wasn't crossed off the polls. Because if it was, we're not staffed to handle it right here, right now on site. So we'll let you fill out a provisional ballot that may or may not count. Again, you would be hard-pressed to tell me or to convince me why I should support somebody who enacts policies such as this. As I've mentioned before, a tax cut's not going to do it because I'm not for sale on that. You want to give me a paycheck and get 8 hours of my workday? Sure. I'll sell you my time and my labor. But I'm not going to sell you my fundamental support of American democracy. I've given years of my life serving this country, and I'm not about to betray the founder's vision for a tax cut. So what else is there? Oh, I'm worried about illegal immigration. As we saw, that's a horseshit response. In case you didn't notice, they removed more people in Georgia from the registered voters list than there are illegal immigrants in the entire state of Georgia. 70% of whom happen to be black. I guess Georgia has a huge illegal immigration problem from Ethiopia or South Africa or Zimbabwe or somewhere else that I'm not familiar with. And I didn't know about it. And even assuming that this was a major problem, that you could show that it was more than 0.00004%, that voter fraud was actually something I needed to be concerned with. I thought that Republicans, at least at the national level, were worried about immigration from Central and South America, Mexico and Honduras and Guatemala and, I don't know, Brazil and Venezuela and all those other places. So please explain to me how a law and policies that are enacted to address that problem end up instead hitting 70% of African Americans. I mean, that's a pretty big miss. I don't know what I'm missing here. And in case you think this is just Georgia, the governor of Texas is saying that during the time of this national pandemic, when we don't want people standing next to each other and coughing on each other and breathing on each other and, 6 feet between everybody, is trying to make it so that there's exactly one place per county where you can drop off your mail-in absentee ballot. Because obviously, since, Trump's Postmaster General wrecked the Postal Service and removed a lot of these mail sorting machines to speed up the process, a lot of people are concerned about mailing their ballots in. So you can fill out your absentee ballot, and you can go and you can hand it to a poll worker. But in the state of Texas, the governor's trying to make it so there's exactly one place you can do that per county. Now, for Randall or Potter County in Amarillo, Texas, that doesn't have a ridiculously large population, this might be feasible. For a town, I don't know, in between Amarillo and Dallas, that has a few hundred people and survives off giving speeding tickets to people traveling on that road in between Amarillo and Dallas, having a few hundred people in line and their cars, even if they all decided to do this process, might be feasible. But in the downtown of Houston or Dallas or Fort Worth, this seems, just to my uneducated mind, like it could be a slight issue. Like we're intentionally trying to create lines here. How many people? First off, I want you to imagine what an 8-hour car line, an 8-hour line of vehicles would look like. Just for a minute, imagine this. Imagine the worst traffic jam you have ever been in. Imagine being stuck on the interstate, whether you're evacuating from a hurricane or you live in Los Angeles or New York and there was an accident on the road in front of you. And imagine being stuck there with everybody else, all looking at each other for, we'll say, 4 hours. And then imagine at the 4-hour mark that at any time you could decide, screw it, I'm going to go home. I don't need to get that direction that badly. This line hasn't moved in 4 hours. If you're sitting in line in that traffic jam that you've been there for 4 hours, haven't been able to get out and use the bathroom, haven't been able to have something to drink unless you brought it with you, and if you did, not really wanting to drink too much because the bathroom problem we just mentioned. Not having to, not even having anything to eat. I mean, it's 4 hours have gone by. We're talking lunchtime here at this point. God, this sounds ridiculous. But again, I remind you from the video, we've already seen that's the result. And that's before you put everybody in a car. And again, at this 4-hour mark, you can leave at any time. Nobody's making you stand in this line. Nobody. Are you staying? If at the end of 4 hours, another 4 hours, mind you, you're finally going to make it to work, are you staying in that line? If at the end of 8 hours, you're finally going to make it to your friend's house, just, I don't know, say hi, are you staying in that line? If at the end of 8 hours, you're going to make it to the grocery store, are you staying in that line or are you trying later? What would it take for you to voluntarily sit in a traffic jam for 8 hours? Because that's what the politicians you're voting for are asking black people to do. Or anybody that just happens to live in a predominantly black neighborhood. I wonder who the majority of those people would be. Again, nobody is saying that you, the individual conservative, the individual Republican, is a racist. When I was a Republican, when I helped campaign and knock on doors, I wasn't a racist. Still not today. But I didn't realize that the people that I was knocking on doors for were backing these kinds of policies. This is a historical problem. We have dealt with this for years. This was the route or the distance between Selma, Alabama and Montgomery, Alabama, that Martin Luther King marched during the Civil Rights Act, or the Civil Rights Movement, that ultimately led to the Civil Rights Acts and the Voter Rights Amendment. 50 miles, less than an hour by car. Remember, back before the Voter Rights Act, you had less than 7% in certain southern states of black people who were eligible to vote that were actually registered. And after that amendment, or after that law was passed, you had a hell of a lot more than 7%. Started getting in the 60s and the 70s. Shelby County, Alabama, the place that filed the case that the Supreme Court ruled on, is 78 miles from Selma, Alabama. I guess Martin Luther King went 50 miles east when he should have gone 78 miles northeast. This is why the progressive left is saying that conservatives and Republicans have an issue with race. You don't get to ally with racists. You don't get to ignore people that are disenfranchising and taking away the rights of tons of Americans based off of race again and not get lumped in with them. I don't care if it furthers your agendas. I don't care if you just want a tax cut. You are supporting this even when you only ignore it. And that is unacceptable. You're better than this. We as a nation are better than this. Don't ignore it. Don't support it by ignoring it. We'll be back after a short break. Well, welcome back, everybody. Thank you. So the next one we're going to dive into, and we're probably going to wrap up shortly after this, was the conservative talking point of the week that popped up to me about Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, and this email thing that I believe it was the New York Post released about a computer that was found, and it had a bunch of derogatory stuff. And, you know, Joe Biden was using his influence to help his son make money and, you know, with Russia and all of this. And then Facebook and Twitter started taking it down, so it didn't really get any legs under it. I'm not in favor of censorship. I understand, after doing some research into it, why it started getting removed. So let me walk you through how this came across to somebody on the left. It's close to the election, and we've got Trump going on about emails again. Just like we did last election when it was Trump and Clinton. Except this time, instead of being about the candidate, it's about the candidate's son. But the candidate that he's running against was involved. So I'm skeptical right off the bat. And then Twitter and Facebook pulling it down makes alarm bells go off in my head. But it also implies to me that maybe, just maybe, this isn't real. That this is some made up, if you'll pardon the expression, bullshit. So I like to get information from both sides. I like to hear what the opposition has to say. I don't want to live in my bubble. Because I think at the end of the day, the best argument should win. And you should be able to change your position, as I changed mine, based off where the evidence and the best arguments lead you. That's how we make progress. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about political progress or scientific progress or determining who's innocent or not guilty or guilty in a trial in court. You're supposed to follow the evidence and the best arguments. So let's go look at the evidence. Here's just a timeline of the Hunter Biden email story. The laptop owner, so a laptop was dropped off at a store for repairs. The laptop owner thinks that it was Hunter Biden that dropped off 3 water-damaged MacBooks at his computer repair shop. He claims to have found some sexually explicit images on there, a 12-minute video smoking drugs. He believes it was a Hunter Biden laptop because of a sticker on the laptop that endorsed the Beau Biden Foundation. I have a sticker on my personal, or excuse me, actually it's on my work laptop for REI, the company that sells backpacking supplies. That doesn't make my laptop property of REI. I don't work for REI. I'm not related to anybody that does, to my knowledge. I'm certainly not the son of somebody who owns REI or runs REI or founded REI. I don't make backpacking supplies, but I have the sticker on my laptop. So we're already in territory of this doesn't seem like the best evidence that this would be the Democratic presidential nominee's son's laptop. because of a sticker that was stuck to it. The best part's right here. He said he couldn't verify the computer owner's identity because he is legally blind and can't see beyond 2 feet in front of him. I can't make this stuff up, guys. So we literally have a blind guy who owns a computer repair shop that can't see more than 2 feet away, claiming that the vice president's son gave him a laptop that has all this stuff on it that a normal person wouldn't just give out. And he knows that this is the case, not because he saw the guy, because he admits that he's legally blind and don't see all too well. But he knows that this was Hunter Biden who dropped off this laptop because of a sticker that was on it. Are you serious? That this is this grand, I don't know. This is what I'm supposed to consider before I go cast my vote. This is the response that Donald Trump and the Republican Party this is the response that you're going to give me to 218,511 dead American citizens under this administration. Is that we know that Joe Biden is corrupt. $218,000 dead Americans under this pandemic that this president has called a hoax. But we know for an absolute fact that his opponent is corrupt. And we should ignore all these dead Americans because a legally blind guy has admitted that while he can't identify the person who dropped off this laptop, that he knows that it's the vice president's son's laptop because of a sticker that was stuck to it. A sticker that I'd be willing to bet that foundation gives away. This is the smoking gun that Fox News gives me. Hold the press, guys. We got him. God, I would have killed to have been in that room when they decided to run this story. Like, can you imagine being the reporter that got this and taking it to your editor? This wouldn't pass. If you worked at your high school newspaper and told them that a legally blind person had given you copies of the vice principal's laptop, and while he couldn't see well enough to make sure that it was the vice president who dropped off this laptop, but that there was a sticker on there of your high school mascot. And that was proof enough to prove that your vice president, I don't know, was having a secret affair. I don't think a high school newspaper, like a high school editor, would run that story. And this was hitting national level press. Guys, you want to know why Facebook and Twitter blocked this story? Because it's a joke. And it gets worse. So that's what Fox News had to say. So now let's go to the websites you don't like. Okay? This is NBC. Oh, by the way, the attorney for Hunter Biden says they have no idea where it came from, but they do know for certain that the meeting that this guy claims happened and had proof of emails on the computer was, you know, where all this corruption went down. There's no record of it. Nobody can provide any proof of it. And Hunter Biden and his attorney have flat out come out and said it didn't happen. So that's for one. Okay. But number two, and more importantly, and more concerning to me, and why I don't remotely take this seriously, apologize for the delay. I got to find it for you. These emails that the New York Post released, nobody knows whether they're authentic or not. The only guy or the only news agency that this legally blind store owner is talking to, apparently, is the New York Post and conservative media. And even when questioned by other sources in conservative media, he doesn't answer key questions. It's hard to believe that somebody who had this kind of documentation on their laptop would, you know, just drop it off for repair somewhere. So no, I really don't care that Facebook and Twitter have started saying you can't share this story because we can't verify whether it's authentic or whether it's fake. That's the big problem. It is literally, right now, fake news, unsourced, except by a legally blind man, and nobody's able to verify whether it's actually real emails or whether it's BS. We'll go to CBS, more centrist, and see if we can find anything else different. The owner, when interviewed by CBS News for 2 hours, contradicted himself about his motivations, which raises questions about his authenticity, whether he's legit or not. He also refuses to provide key details about his interactions with Rudy Giuliani. Giuliani held on to the information for months and released it a few weeks before the election. And this is the big one. This right here is the big one. For this national conspiracy that you think, already as ludicrous as it sounds, would be big if it was real, nobody will release any of the information or the documents or anything else to anybody else to review. So again, let's go back to high school. If I went to my high school newspaper editor, you know, some 17-year-old kid, senior in high school, bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, wants to go off to college, and I was a, 15-year-old kid, and I said, hey, got this story. The vice principal is having an affair on his wife. Well, one of the first things my high school 17-year-old editor is probably going to ask me is go, okay, how do you know this? Well, we've got his laptop. We won't even make it his kid's laptop. We'll do it one better. We've got his laptop, the vice principal's laptop. And on there, there's emails back and forth between him and the lady he's having an affair with. And there's even video. There's a 12-minute video. Really? Okay, well, tell me more about this. Well, he dropped it off at a computer repair station. There's a few problems with it, though. The guy who owns the computer shop is legally blind and can't say for sure whether it was him or not. Okay, well, how do you know that it's his laptop? Oh, well, it's got a sticker of the Wildcats on there. You know, our high school football team? Yeah, it's got a sticker on there that says Go Wildcats. So we know it's his laptop. It has a free sticker on there that we give away to anybody who asks for one. And that's your proof that it's his laptop. Well, yeah, I mean, who else would have one? Well, can I see the emails and the videos and, you know, make sure that they're legit? No, I just want to publish the emails. I'll tell you what they say. Don't worry about reading them or looking at them or, you know, having anybody else look at them. So let me get this straight. You got a half blind guy, actually more than half blind, a legally blind guy that admits that he can't tell you who dropped this laptop off for sure or anywhere close to sure. The only way that you know that it's his laptop is because it has a Go Wildcat sticker on it. You know, something that anybody who's ever been to high school in this city or anybody who, you know, has a kid that goes to this high school in this city would have, and they wouldn't even have to pay any money for it. You claim you've got these emails, but you won't even let me see them. So you're just going to publish some text that supposedly says they're emails. Am I missing anything here? Well, I gave the laptop to the police. Oh, has the police said anything? Well, I kept a copy of it for myself, but have the police said anything? Yeah, they said they're looking into it. So by gave it to the police, do you mean you just like went down to the local office and just like handed it to them and said, hey, y'all should look into this? Yeah, something like that. And they made you fill out some paper? Well, I wouldn't leave until I filled out a report. I don't think my high school editor is publishing that story until there's a little bit more meat on the bone. And me as a voter, if you want me to ignore all of the corruption in your own administration, if you want me to ignore the death toll that continues to mount in this country, if you want me to ignore the voter suppression that you support and the KKK and the neo-Nazi Party of America that's endorsing you, see last week's episode for more in-depth into that. But if you want me to ignore all of that and vote for you and your guy, you're going to have something a whole lot stronger. A whole lot stronger than a legally blind guy telling me that he knows that it's this guy's computer because of a sticker that was stuck to it. I mean, guys, if that's the best we got, if that's what you're down to justify your support of this administration and this candidate, is a legally blind guy's visual identification of Hunter Biden based on a sticker stuck to a laptop computer that he won't release to anybody else to actually look at and verify. He may be legally blind, but you're being willfully blind. You're better than this. You can vote against this and still be a conservative. You can vote against this. That doesn't make you progressive. That doesn't make you a Democrat. It doesn't make you a socialist. It doesn't make you a communist. It doesn't make you any of those things. It means you're telling your party that they need to be better than this. This is where you're at right now. This is what you're supporting right now. If you don't want to keep supporting this, Republican Voters Against Trump is a website and a YouTube series that has hundreds and probably thousands by now of people that are just like you that are voting against him. The Lincoln Project is a conservative source that posts all the reasons that as conservatives, they specifically oppose this president and his policies. Not voting for this man or voting against this administration doesn't make you some traitor to conservatism. It's you telling conservatives, You're better than this, and they need to be. It would be you telling the Republican Party that this is unacceptable. That this many Americans dying from a disease that we're pretending does not exist is unacceptable. That taking away other American citizens' rights to vote based on their race is unacceptable. That endorsing nonsense stories about legally blind guys and laptops with stickers on them to make your opponent look bad because you're losing the election. That you're better than this. That it's poor sportsmanship. And that we teach our 5-year-olds, our 5th graders, our 15-year-olds, and our college-level athletes better sportsmanship than this. And that if the conservatives in this country want your vote, that this kind of behavior is not why you're conservative. And they need to behave better than this. Thank you. That's going to wrap up our show for today. I hope to see you next week. We'll be here with open phone lines next week, Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. Pacific.